Her hair was her pride, long, silky, and admired by everyone in the village.
It symbolized years of patience, care, and grace. But that beauty became the spark of silent hatred in her daughter-in-law's heart. One night, while everyone slept, jealousy turned to cruelty. The sound of scissors cut through the silence, and through a bond that could never be repaired. By morning, her stunning hair lay scattered on the floor, and so did her dignity. But what the daughter-in-law didn't know was that he saw everything, and what followed would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Keep way in a quiet countryside, nestled between golden fields and whispering trees, lived a woman named Mira, known far and wide for her kindness and her breathtakingly beautiful hair. Her hair flowed like a black river under sunlight, reaching her waist, soft and shining, as if it carried the stories of her entire life. The villagers often said her hair was a blessing, something that made her look almost timeless. But to Mira, it wasn't vanity. It was a piece of her history. Her late husband used to love brushing it every evening, saying it made her look like the moon's shadow. After his death, she continued caring for it as if it were his memory made visible. Every morning, she'd sit by the window, oiling it gently, her reflection a quiet reminder that some beauty survives grief. Now, her son Arjun, a hard-working man in his early 30s, had recently brought home his wife, Nisha. Nisha was modern, elegant, and from the city, a world far different from Mira's. She carried herself with confidence, dressed in fine fabrics, and spoke with charm that initially impressed everyone. At first, Mira had welcomed her like her own daughter. She had cooked her favorite meals, decorated the new couple's room with flowers, and even handed her the gold bangles she once wore as a bride. But soon she began to notice small changes in Nisha's eyes, tiny flickers of something darker when people complimented Mira instead of her. It started with subtle remarks. When neighbors visited, their eyes always drifted toward Mira. "You look so graceful, Auntie," they would say, "even younger than your age." Nisha would smile, but her eyes would narrow for a brief second, her lips tightening behind polite words. Inside, jealousy began to bloom like a poisonous vine, wrapping around her pride. Arjun often worked late, leaving the two women alone in the house. Mira didn't mind. She filled her days with cooking, gardening, and tending to the little temple in the courtyard. She spoke softly, laughed rarely, and never complained. But for Nisha, each quiet afternoon felt unbearable. The way Mira's calm presence filled the home made her feel smaller, almost invisible. Every morning, Mira would comb her hair in front of the mirror, sunlight reflecting off each strand like silk. The neighbors often stopped by, asking for her secret, admiring her beauty. Even Arjun would sometimes say with a smile, "Ma, your hair still shines more than Nisha's gold jewelry." It was a harmless compliment said with affection, but it echoed painfully inside Nisha's mind. That night, Nisha couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts twisting. Why does he always compare me to her? Why can't people see me the way they see her? Jealousy turned into quiet rage. She started to notice every small thing about Mira, the way she dressed, simply yet looked radiant, how her presence seemed to command respect without trying. Nisha began to feel overshadowed in her own home. The more she tried to outshine Mira, the more she failed. Her makeup, her clothes, her perfume, nothing drew the same admiration. The villagers would always say, "Your mother-in-law is a lucky woman. She glows even without effort." Each word stabbed Nisha's pride a little deeper. Days turned into weeks, and that envy began shaping her actions. She stopped helping Mira in the kitchen, stopped eating with her, and even whispered to Arjun that maybe his mother was too controlling or too traditional. But Arjun dismissed it gently. He knew his mother's heart was pure. This only fueled Nisha's resentment more. Then one afternoon, an old neighbor dropped by with her daughter. The young girl shyly told Mira, "Auntie, I want hair like yours when I grow up." Mira smiled, stroked the girl's hair and said, "It just takes patience and love." "My dear." Behind them, Nisha's jaw tightened. Something inside her snapped that day. That night, she couldn't stop replaying that moment in her mind. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to mock her, her own hair looking dull and lifeless under the dim light. The more she thought, the deeper her bitterness grew. To Nisha, Mira's hair was no longer just hair. It had become a symbol of everything she lacked. The respect, the admiration, the love she craved, all of it seemed tied to those long, beautiful locks. And in her jealousy, she convinced herself that if that beauty was gone, maybe she would finally be cinching till the end. Because revenge sometimes grows quietly. Just like hair, only stronger. Meanwhile, Mira noticed her daughter-in-law growing distant. She tried to bridge the gap, offering kindness and understanding. One evening, she even placed a small silver comb on Nisha's dresser, saying softly, "This was my mother's. It's yours now. May it bring you peace." But Nisha didn't see the gesture as love. She saw it as pity. The silver comb only reminded her of what she could never have, and so, the tension grew like invisible smoke in the house, unspoken, but suffocating. Arjun remained unaware, too busy with work to see the silent war unfolding between the two women he loved most. Then came that fateful evening. Rain drummed softly on the roof. The power had gone out, and the house was wrapped in a quiet darkness. Mira sat by the window, brushing her hair, humming an old song her husband used to love. The candlelight flickered gently, casting shadows that danced across her face. She didn't notice the figure watching her from the doorway, eyes cold, lips pressed tight. In that moment, Nisha's jealousy had reached its breaking point. She had convinced herself it wasn't cruelty, it was justice. A small act to humble the woman who unknowingly stole her spotlight. She waited for Mira to sleep, waited until the old woman's soft breathing filled the silence of the house. Then, with trembling hands, she reached for the scissors on the dressing table. Her reflection stared back at her, twisted and unsure. But jealousy has a way of silencing conscience. She crept toward Mira's bed, each step echoing louder in her head. The candle still burned faintly, and Mira's long hair glistened like silk across the pillow. Nisha hesitated, just for a moment. Then the first snip cut through the silence like thunder. A few strands fell, then more. She didn't stop until it was all uneven, ruined, the once beautiful hair now lifeless and jagged. When she finally stepped back, her heart pounded in her chest. Her hands shook, her breath trembled. The satisfaction she expected never came. Instead, the room felt heavier, colder. Mira stirred slightly but didn't wake. Nisha hurried away, hiding the scissors, trying to calm her racing heart. She told herself it was over, that no one would ever know, that tomorrow, when Mira saw her reflection, she'd finally feel the humiliation Nisha had felt for months. But Nisha didn't know. Someone had seen her. Behind the half-open door, Arjun had returned home early that night. He stood frozen in disbelief, watching the woman he once thought was his partner in love turn into a stranger before his eyes. The candlelight caught the horror on his face as he realized what she had done. And as Nisha slipped back into bed, smiling faintly to herself, Arjun remained standing in the dark hallway, silent, shattered, and forever changed. The bond that once held their home together had just been severed. Just like Mira's hair. The next morning dawned gray, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Birds chirped faintly, but the usual peace of Mira's home was missing. Something invisible had changed. Mira woke slowly, feeling a strange lightness around her head. As she reached up, her fingers met uneven strands, short, coarse and jagged. Confusion washed over her. She sat up, heart pounding, staring at the strands of her hair scattered across the pillow and floor. For a moment, her mind refused to understand. It felt like a bad dream, something that couldn't be real. But as she picked up a handful of those long black strands, her chest tightened. The realization hit her like a wave. Her hair, her symbol of strength and memory, was gone. She stood before the mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable. The woman staring back looked broken, stripped of something sacred. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Mira wasn't the kind of woman who cried easily. Instead, silence filled the room, heavy, deep, and unbearable. She knew this wasn't an accident. No wind, no child, no chance could have done this. Someone had deliberately cut her hair while she slept. The thought pierced her like a blade. Who would do such a cruel thing? And more importantly, why? She didn't confront anyone. She simply tied her ruined hair with trembling hands, wrapped her shawl around her head, and stepped into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Her dignity wouldn't let her scream or point fingers. When Nisha walked in, pretending to yawn and stretch, her eyes flicked briefly to Mira's covered head. For a fraction of a second she froze, but quickly hid it behind a fake smile. "Ma, you're up early," she said lightly, pouring herself some water. Mira didn't reply. Her silence filled the room more loudly than any words could. Nisha tried to act normal, humming as she made tea, but her heart raced. Every time Mira moved, she flinched slightly, expecting a question, an accusation, but none came. Mira spoke softly, calmly, like any other day. That calm scared Nisha more than any outburst would have. Because sometimes silence is not peace. It's the sound of something deeper forming beneath the surface. Arjun, who had barely slept the night before, sat quietly at the dining table. He couldn't bring himself to look at his mother. He couldn't look at Nisha either. The image of her cutting Mira's hair replayed in his mind like a haunting echo. The woman he had loved now felt like a stranger in his home. He wanted to shout, to confront her, but words caught in his throat. Mira noticed his unease, but she said nothing. A mother can read her son's silence better than his words. She sensed something had been seen, something understood. But she didn't press. Instead, she moved through her day with grace, tending to her plants, feeding the stray cows, lighting incense before the small temple in the corner. Her serenity was unsettling. Even the air in the house felt heavier now. Days passed. The villagers who came to visit noticed the change immediately. "Mira ji, what happened to your beautiful hair?" they asked with concern. She smiled gently and said only, "Some things are meant to be lost." No one knew what she meant, but everyone felt the weight behind her words. Nisha began to crumble inside. The guilt she had buried under arrogance started to surface. Every time Mira walked past her with quiet composure, it burned her more. She expected outrage, maybe even punishment, but Mira's calm forgiveness was unbearable. Arjun grew distant. His silence toward Nisha became a wall she couldn't climb. He left early for work, came home late, and avoided her gaze. When she tried to talk, he only gave short, cold answers. She could feel him slipping away, inch by inch. One evening, as Nisha was folding laundry, she overheard Arjun speaking softly to his mother. He said, "Ma, I saw everything that night." Her hands froze. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath catching. Mira didn't look shocked. She simply sighed, her voice steady. "I know, Beta. I felt it in your silence." Arjun's voice broke, filled with shame and anger. "How could she do this to you?" "I wanted to tell her to leave that night," but Mira raised a hand gently. "No, Arjun, you will not say a word. If jealousy made her do this, then let time be her mirror. Let her see herself clearly. I don't want revenge. I want her to understand what she's destroyed. Not just my hair, but something within her." Nisha felt her legs weaken. She sat down on the floor, trembling. Mira's words weren't filled with anger, but something far worse. Grace. Grace that exposed Nisha's ugliness more than any punishment could. From that day on, Mira's silence became her strength. She no longer tried to hide her hair. She cut the uneven strands short, shaped them neatly, and carried herself with even more dignity. She began helping women in the village who suffered from low self-esteem, teaching them to embrace their scars, their age, their imperfections. Her new look didn't make her weaker. It made her glow differently. Her strength came from the inside now, and people noticed. Women began visiting her for advice, saying she looked radiant, even younger. Her confidence became her crown. Meanwhile, Nisha watched all of this unravel with growing discomfort. The very act she thought would make Mira less had somehow made her more. She couldn't stand how the villagers now spoke of Mira's grace, her inner beauty, her resilience. Even Arjun looked at his mother with deeper respect and affection, the kind Nisha had always wanted from him. Every word of praise for Mira was another reminder of Nisha's mistake. Her jealousy had not only failed, it had backfired completely. One morning, Nisha found Mira's old comb on her dressing table, the same silver one she had once rejected. It gleamed softly in the sunlight, almost as if waiting for her to understand its meaning. Beneath it lay a small note, written in Mira's calm handwriting. True beauty doesn't fade when it's cut. It only grows stronger when it forgives. Tears filled Nisha's eyes. The guilt she had tried to bury finally surfaced, suffocating her. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, not as the victim she imagined, but as the cause of her own unhappiness. She wanted to apologize, but shame kept her silent. Every time she looked at Mira, her throat tightened. She wanted to undo what she had done, but the past doesn't uncut what's been severed. As weeks passed, Mira began to rebuild her peace. Her hair slowly grew back, softer and lighter, framing her face with quiet grace. She seemed at peace, but her eyes held a sadness that never fully left. Arjun, too, had changed. He now saw his mother not just as a parent, but as a symbol of strength. He stopped defending Nisha, stopped ignoring the truth. His silence toward his wife became heavier, colder. Nisha began living in her own quiet torment. The house that once felt hers now felt like a mirror reflecting her worst self. The admiration she once craved was replaced with pity. Even the servants whispered behind her back, their eyes avoiding hers. But the real punishment came in the form of isolation, not forced, but earned. The more Mira forgave, the more Nisha suffered in her own conscience. One evening, Nisha stood behind Mira as she watered the plants. The golden light of sunset fell softly on Mira's face, her short hair glistening like new silk. She looked peaceful, radiant, untouched by bitterness. And at that moment, Nisha understood what true beauty meant. It wasn't in the length of hair or the shine of jewelry. It was in the grace that remains after cruelty, the calm that follows betrayal. That night, she sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, the same mirror that had once witnessed her jealousy. Her own reflection felt unfamiliar now. Her beauty looked hollow, her eyes tired. For the first time, she saw the ugliness that had lived inside her all along. She picked up a pair of scissors. For a moment, her hand trembled. Then, without hesitation, she cut off a long strand of her own hair. The sound echoed in the quiet room. It wasn't an act of pain this time, but of remorse. Down the hallway, Mira heard the faint snip of scissors. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping silently down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. Because some lessons aren't taught through anger. They're taught through the weight of silence, through the mirror of one's own actions. And though Nisha didn't know it yet, Mira had already forgiven her. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It simply allows the truth to bloom on its own. Months had passed since that dreadful night, yet the memory of it lingered in every corner of the house like a ghost that refused to leave. Mira's hair had begun to grow again, but what truly changed was the way people looked at her. The villagers who once admired her beauty now admired her strength. Her calmness had become her armor, her silence, her power. The women of the neighborhood often came to her courtyard to seek her wisdom. They'd bring oil, herbs, and flowers, and Mira would teach them not just how to nurture their hair, but how to nurture peace. She'd say softly, "Hair grows back." But bitterness never does. Let go before it consumes you. Every word carried weight, born from pain and forgiveness. Arjun watched his mother with pride. His love for her deepened, his respect unshakable. But his silence toward Nisha remained. He spoke to her only when necessary, his words stripped of warmth. Nisha felt that coldness more sharply than any anger. Her nights became long and sleepless. Guilt had turned into a quiet madness. She saw Mira's forgiveness as a mirror reflecting her worst self. And as Mira's reputation grew brighter in the village, Nisha's heart grew darker with shame. Then came the day that changed everything. The village temple was celebrating its annual festival, a day of music, blessings, and community. Everyone dressed in their finest clothes, and Mira, despite her simple nature, was asked by the temple head to lead the women's ceremony. It was a moment of honor, recognition for her quiet strength and grace. When she appeared that morning, wearing a simple cream sari, Her short hair brushed neatly and adorned with jasmine flowers, the crowd fell silent. She looked radiant, like serenity itself had taken human form. Whispers filled the air. She looks beautiful even without her long hair. It suits her. She's glowing. True grace never fades. Each compliment struck Nisha like lightning. She stood at the back, dressed in expensive silk, but she had never felt smaller. The very thing she tried to destroy had only made Mira more loved. As Mira began to light the temple lamps, the soft glow illuminated her face. The priest praised her devotion and wisdom, thanking her for guiding the women of the village. Cameras flashed, villagers clapped, and even the elders bowed slightly as a gesture of respect. Arjun stood nearby, watching his mother with pride, and his wife with quiet disappointment. In that moment, Nisha realized she had not only lost her husband's affection, but also her own dignity. Her jealousy had made her the villain in a story she had written for herself. After the ceremony, women surrounded Mira, complimenting her strength and asking about her journey. Someone said, "You must tell us, Mira ji, how did you find the courage to carry on after losing your hair?" Many women would have broken down. A soft smile touched Mira's lips. She replied gently, "When you lose what you think defines you, you find what truly does. My hair was never my beauty, it was my vanity's shadow. When it was cut, I found myself again." The crowd applauded, moved by her grace. But among them, one face turned pale, Nisha's. Her throat tightened. Each word was a reminder of her crime. As the crowd dispersed, a group of young women approached Mira with admiration, taking photos and recording her advice. In one of those recordings, a curious child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked innocently, "Ma, who cut Mira Auntie's hair that night?" The question silenced the group. The mother hushed the child, but the words had already floated into the air. Everyone looked uncertainly at one another. Mira's smile didn't falter, but her eyes softened with the weight of memory. Before she could respond, another voice spoke, low, steady, filled with emotion. "I know who did. It was Arjun." The crowd turned. His face was calm, but his eyes were firm. He looked at his mother first, then at Nisha, who stood frozen, her hands trembling. "I saw it," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the courtyard. "That night when my mother slept, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't fate. It was jealousy." Gasps filled the air. Mira tried to stop him with a raised hand, but he continued. She never spoke of it, never blamed anyone. She forgave in silence. But sometimes, silence protects the wrong heart. The murmurs grew louder. All eyes turned to Nisha, whose face had turned pale as chalk. Her lips quivered, her knees felt weak. She wanted to speak, to deny it. But the truth was already written in her trembling body. The temple courtyard that once echoed with music now carried only whispers, heavy, judging, cold. Nisha's eyes filled with tears. "Arjun, please." But Arjun didn't look at her. His voice broke slightly. "You didn't just cut her hair, Nisha. You cut the very roots of trust in this house. Do you know what it's like to wake up and see your mother's dignity on the floor? I saw you that night. I wanted to believe it was a nightmare, but it wasn't." The villagers looked at Mira, waiting for her reaction. But Mira remained calm, her voice soft but steady. "Enough, Arjun. What's done is done." She turned toward the crowd. "Yes, my hair was cut while I slept. But I chose not to expose anyone because forgiveness teaches better than punishment ever will." Her words silenced the murmurs again. If my suffering taught someone what jealousy destroys, then it wasn't in vain. Her grace only deepened the shame that consumed Nisha. Tears streamed down her face. She fell to her knees in front of Mira, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I was blinded by envy. I thought if I took away what made you admired, I'd finally be seen. But I was wrong. I only made myself ugly." Mira looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then she placed a hand gently on Nisha's head. "The day you understand the pain you caused is the day your redemption begins. Rise, child. Not for me, but for yourself." The crowd stood in stunned silence. Some women wept quietly. Others looked at Mira with newfound reverence. But forgiveness, though divine, doesn't erase consequences. In the days that followed, the story spread across the village like wildfire. People whispered about the daughter-in-law who had cut her mother-in-law's hair out of jealousy, and the mother-in-law who forgave her with dignity. Nisha couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes. Shame became her companion. Markets grew quieter when she walked by. The women who once envied her beauty now pitied her. Even her friends from the city heard of the scandal and stopped calling. Arjun grew colder. His silence became an invisible wall between them. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't even blame her. His calm was worse than anger. It was the kind of silence that says you're no longer trusted. At home, Meera continued to treat Nisha kindly. She still served her food, still asked if she needed anything, but the warmth that once lived in her eyes was gone. What remained was compassion without closeness, mercy without attachment. Nisha began to crumble under the weight of her guilt. Nights became sleepless, days empty. She could hear her own conscience whispering louder than any voice. The memory of that night, the sound of scissors, the candle's flicker, Meera's peaceful face, haunted her. One evening, she found herself standing outside Meera's room again. The door was slightly open. Inside, Meera sat by the window, combing her short hair, the evening light soft around her. For a moment, it was the same scene. Only now, the peace in Meera's face no longer made Nisha jealous. It broke her heart. She stepped forward quietly and placed a small box on the table. Inside was her gold jewelry, the wedding gifts, the bangles Meera had once given her. Meera looked at her puzzled. Nisha bowed her head. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I've learned what I needed to. I lost your respect, and I lost myself. This gold means nothing compared to that. Meera looked at her for a long moment, then closed the box gently and pushed it back toward her. Keep it, she said softly. You'll need it to rebuild yourself. Tears streamed down Nisha's face as she whispered, How can you still be so kind? Meera's eyes met hers, calm and deep. Because hate never heals, Nisha, only grace does. You punished yourself more than I ever could. That night, Nisha cried for hours. But for the first time, those tears were not for pity. They were for cleansing. And as the moonlight filled the room, Meera's shadow fell across the floor, short-haired, strong, and luminous. The woman who had once been a victim now stood as a symbol of resilience, while the one who had been jealous finally began to awaken to her own humanity. The house that once echoed with unspoken tension now carried a strange calm, like a storm that had passed, leaving behind still air and scattered leaves. Weeks turned into months. The scandal that had once gripped the village slowly faded into whispers of the past, but its lessons remained carved in every heart. Meera's grace became a quiet legend. Women spoke of her not as a victim, but as a force of calm forgiveness, a living example of dignity that could not be destroyed. Her short hair had grown just below her shoulders now, thicker, softer, and shimmering once again in the morning light. It wasn't just hair anymore. It was a story, a symbol of everything she had endured and overcome. Every morning, she still sat by her window, brushing her hair. But this time, she didn't hum the songs of the past. She hummed new ones, songs of renewal, of healing. The mirror reflected not the woman she used to be, but the woman she had become. Stronger, wiser, and infinitely more beautiful. Nisha, meanwhile, had changed in ways words could barely describe. The arrogant sparkle in her eyes had long faded, replaced by humility. She no longer wore expensive clothes or heavy makeup. Instead, she dressed simply, her face bare of pretense. Every morning, she quietly followed Meera into the courtyard, helping water the plants, sweeping the floor, preparing tea. She didn't do it to impress anyone. It came from a place of quiet repentance. She spoke little, smiled rarely, but her actions began to heal what her jealousy had once shattered. Arjun noticed the change. He didn't trust it at first. He had seen too much. But over time, he couldn't ignore what he saw, his wife. Once consumed by pride, now humble, thoughtful, and patient. Still, something was missing. Forgiveness that felt complete, spoken aloud. That moment came one morning, almost unexpectedly. Mira was invited by a women's organization in the nearby town to speak about resilience. It was a gathering of women from different villages, and Mira was to be honored for her courage and grace. The whole village was proud. Even Arjun insisted on accompanying her, but Nisha surprised them both when she quietly said, "I'd like to come too, if you'll let me." There was silence for a moment. Mira looked at her, then nodded softly. "Come." That day, under the soft sun, the three of them walked together to the community hall, a family once broken now walking in quiet understanding. The hall was filled with women of all ages. Some had faced cruelty, others betrayal, some had lost everything but their hope. When Mira stepped on stage, the audience fell silent. She didn't speak like a lecturer. She spoke like a mother. "When something precious is taken from you," she said, her voice calm but powerful, "you have two choices, to let bitterness grow or to let wisdom bloom." She paused, scanning the room. "I lost something that was part of me, something I thought defined me. But in that loss, I discovered that beauty isn't in what you keep, it's in how you carry what's left." The hall erupted in applause. But in the back row, Nisha sat still, tears streaming down her face. Her heart clenched with a mix of pride and pain. Mira's strength, her gentleness. It was something Nisha knew she'd never match, but it inspired her to become better. Months later, when Mira's hair had finally returned to its former length, the village decided to hold a small celebration to honor her contribution to the women's community. This time, Nisha was the one who prepared everything, the decorations, the sweets, the flowers. She wanted the world to see the woman she had once wronged as the queen she truly was. When Mira stepped into the courtyard that evening, her long black hair flowing again under the golden sunset, a hush fell over everyone. She looked radiant, almost ethereal, but what caught everyone's attention was Nisha, standing beside her, holding the same pair of scissors from that terrible night, now tied with a red ribbon. Nisha stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "These scissors once destroyed something beautiful," she said to the crowd. "But today I return them not as a weapon, but as a reminder that envy cuts deeper than any blade, and forgiveness heals more than time ever could." The audience fell silent, then broke into applause. Mira's eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled, a smile of peace, of closure. Arjun, standing among the crowd, looked at both women with pride. The wound that had once split their home had finally healed, not through punishment, but through transformation. As the evening faded, Mira sat quietly under the jasmine tree. Nisha came to sit beside her. The moonlight spilled over them, soft and silver. Mira gently ran her fingers through her hair and said, "Do you see, Nisha? It grows back, stronger each time, just like people do." Nisha nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Ma, and I'll never forget that again." For a long while they sat together in silence, listening to the night breeze move through the trees. The pain, the guilt, the shame, it had all transformed into something else. Peace. From that day, Nisha became an active volunteer in the same women's organization Mira supported. She began teaching young girls about inner beauty, respect, and emotional strength. She spoke openly about jealousy, calling it the silent destroyer of love. Her honesty moved many. Slowly, people began to see her differently, not as the woman who cut her mother-in-law's hair, but as the woman who changed after it. Mira's story continued to inspire beyond the village. Her speech was shared online, her wisdom quoted by many. Women everywhere connected with her message. True beauty doesn't fade when it's cut. It only grows stronger when it forgives. The final scene of their lives together wasn't filled with drama, but with serenity. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, who had once stood on opposite sides of jealousy, now stood as examples of healing. As the years passed, Mira's hair turned silver, and Nisha's grew long and healthy. Sometimes Mira would tease, "Now yours shines more than mine," and Nisha would smile shyly, replying, "Only because you taught me how to care for it, with patience." And somewhere deep down, both of them knew, beauty may begin in appearance, but it ends in the heart. When jealousy cuts deep, forgiveness grows deeper. Watch till the end. Because what happens next might just change the way you see beauty, pride, and love forever.